Hehehe and welcome to another PrisciTV day. Hope y'all doing okay doke today. Today is the second day of the week. So let's enjoy. Hi Moppy. Hi Annalith. Hehehe doctor. Hi Mello. Hello Ace and Hehehe too. Enjoy the lunch. This days has being messy, but I know here I can make em happier. Shall we start? Today it's gonna be a Pepe day. Froggy Froggy Day. Big frogs are scary. When I was small I did catch some small frogs. With a cup, but then let em free again. Since on school there was lots of em. But they were big ones, they were scary. Kiddo stuff.
Yeah.
Let's see some Pepes stuff.
Yeah.
An anonymous thanks you for
Yeah.
the subbies. Thanks.
Yeah. Wow.
Prisci was PrisciTV was always about Pepe, but I am sad that I can't do the Pepe voice right now. When we can I will Pepe roll all the time lololol. I mean Pepe Pepe. Wink wink. Mello thanks you so much. Pepes. That sounds funny. Pepes. Someday I wanna have a pet and y'all can talk on TTS as Pepe. That would be crazy. Lots of VTubers have TTS pets. So when the time come I want to do it. So y'all can have a form in this dimension. Lololo. A Pepe form. But yeah, my brodas, let's Pepe go and let's Pepe start. Frog. Frog. Big frog. My BRODAS, thanks for being here. Let's watch some vids. Not the scared mouse. Lololo. I hope I win the mouse PC. There's a giveaway going on, y'all can enter.
This is Samson, my giant African bullfrog. He likes to relax in water, dig in the dirt, eat anything that moves, and more recently, act like a total menace, forcing me to make a completely new and much larger 6-foot paludarium, which is almost as long as I am tall because the other could no longer contain him, and that's not because he outgrew it. Now when I say he's large, it's not hyperbole. He's literally a giant among frogs, and will likely grow to around 10 inches long. He's currently 8 inches from here to rear, weighing in at a whopping 33
Hello,
ounces.
voice.
But don't let his rotund appearance fool you, he's built different. ABFs are just as agile as any other species and made for battle. In the wild, the large males clash
Built
for
different.
breeding rights, and the competition is fierce. In other words, they're as indestructible as a frog could possibly be, which is precisely why Samson simultaneously created a major problem and survived a potentially life-threatening scenario. Allow me to explain. Last year I remade his entire home because the aquarium leaked. The revision looked great and included features I thought would improve his quality of life, including a dripping branch overhang to support plants and provide refuge within the water feature. However, this ended up being a terrible decision. What was intended to and initially appeared to be a place of tranquility must have become an annoyance. He decided to exit the building. I was disturbed to find him sitting on the floor one day, but thankfully he wasn't injured from such a fall. This all happened shortly after the build. I dampened the drips and added clamps to prevent it from happening again, and everything seemed fine until recently when I did a water change. I must not have properly dialed the drips, and apparently the clamps couldn't contain him this whole time because I found him on the floor once again. Luckily he's been calm since, but I can't take any more chances because
Pepe
next
freedom.
time he might not be so lucky. There won't be a next time though. That's because I decided to build him a new home already for a completely different reason. He's almost too big to fit through this gap, which isn't ideal for him or me. The solution was simple: create a front opening enclosure to eliminate this issue for good. Luckily, it had already been in the works for months, but his recent antics motivated me to finish it sooner than later. From the start, my plan was to make something within the same footprint as a standard 125-gallon long aquarium. He currently lives in a 75-gallon, which is actually the same width. He moves in this space well, but I knew that having extra length and height would allow for better versions of the features he already enjoys. Well, all the features except for the drip overhang and a removable lid. Naturally, they don't make tanks like this, so I took matters into my own hands and built one myself. I got 1/2 inch thick glass rough cut at a local glazer and had to do some prep work before assembling the pieces. It's rare that I add frames to these custom tanks, but I felt it was best for this one because of how he broke through the lid. I'd have to add screens again, and with the front opening system, I could just attach them directly to the frame.
Big tank.
Having tamper-proof filtration with these large frogs is a must, so I always drill for bulkheads to avoid any mischief. I wouldn't add the glass tracks or lid till much later. With the canvas set, my goal now is to create a landscape reminiscent of the African bullfrog's native range in southern Africa. When they're not hibernating in the dry season, they often reside near ephemeral water holes similar to this. With this in mind, I'd say his previous setups were designed well around his needs, but they were far from an accurate representation of where he'd actually live. Part of that, and what I've done before, is provide a land area large enough for burrowing. With this new footprint, I had the opportunity to make features like that much larger. To make it, I'd need some glass, and where better to obtain it than a retired paludarium. Salvaging materials like this is more work, but it helps keep costs down and is a great way to repurpose things. However, just getting glass wasn't enough. The front was already the right size, so I used it as a guide to adjust the height of the others. When recombined later, these panes will create a land area of roughly 12 gallons. Before that, I had work to do on the background, which will utilize new techniques. That said, it began like many others. I used the tank's measurements to cut down sheets of XPS foam for a base layer. Of course, I also accounted for the bulkheads. Creating side panels is more work, but they help these projects appear far more immersive, so I had to do that here. The foam didn't require much silicone either. A few dabs were more than enough to lock them in. Adding the land feature was simple too. I adhered bumpers to the edges and assembled it like any other aquarium. The silicone had to cure before I could do a water test. I've had issues with Sam's land area leaking in the past, so this was an essential step. Catching leaks early is always best, and luckily that wasn't an issue here. The background required more structure before I could continue, and the beauty of this technique is that it can be made largely with scraps, which I always keep. Creating a gradual transition into the land area would help facilitate the appearance of a watering hole and make the setup functional for Sam. Simply making the rough shape of stairs would be sufficient for this particular setup.
Can you clean the excess of silicone?
No additional carving necessary. All of these had to be secured
It's
to the
like
glass
rubbery.
and each other as well. Although Sam hated the dripping
So it can
feature,
be cutted.
he does appreciate a good overhang. I built up more foam to provide one. After all, this is something that would naturally exist at a watering hole,
But
and
I
the
am
plan
not
was to
sure
make
if
it
it's
look
okay
similar
to do that.
this. I could have continued building the structure with foam scraps, but I knew expanding foam would speed up the process, and it did. I will admit that I got a little overzealous with it and had to carve off some excess. This rough-looking foundation is exactly that, a foundation. It serves no aesthetic function, and is there simply to fill void space so the enclosure remains as light as possible. Taping over the frame and bulkheads is an easy way to preserve features that must remain unaltered. I don't know about you, but I'm absolutely tired of carving foam. And I realize I just used it, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm referring to pretty much every way that I've used it in the past. For being honest, it's a very wasteful process, and the results end up being lackluster. You spend hours carving something which looks great, until you add grout, paint, or some combination of the two. The details end up getting muddied, resulting in an artificial look. I've been using techniques like these for decades, and although they've served me well till now, I'd like to largely retire them moving forward. I was really inspired about a year ago whenever I was watching Reels, and I saw some random guy carving a faux rock panel. It wasn't for animals, but I knew it was a potential solution to the foaming process I've become disenfranchised with. Since then, I've been doing research and experimenting in my spare time with grouts, concretes, and other materials to find an ideal solution.
Wow.
The primary issue with concrete is its weight. As you can imagine, it's quite heavy, and whenever you're making a giant background in these big setups, some of which I haven't shown you yet, it's going to get really heavy, and so it's not going to fly if we're just using standard concrete. Now, there are ways to make it lighter, which I explored, but none of those solutions seemed viable. As I explored my options and did research, I came across this incredible product, the Buddy Rhodes Vertical Concrete Mix. This is literally what is being used to create large zoo displays both in and around enclosures. It's non-toxic, eco-friendly, lightweight, strong, carvable, and fairly inexpensive. I'll give a full cost breakdown later on, but as you can imagine, whenever I discovered this, I was extremely excited. For it to work as intended, it must be mixed with ramp primer and water. I measured each and combined them in a bucket. This concrete is also easy to color with pigments, and since I'm attempting to replicate dirt, a light brown seemed like the obvious choice. I mixed this into the liquids before blending in the concrete.
Can't wait to see the results.
For proper adhesion to the foam, a mix of 50-50 ramp and water had to be sprayed on. Once tacky, I simply slapped the concrete in place. It honestly was a lot of fun, and took me back to playing with mud when I was young. Anyway, as I covered the foam and built the structure, I considered the environment I wished to recreate and how I'd carve it out to achieve that appearance, knowing that most of this would be removed. I let it firm up for about 15 minutes before carving. It was still wet, but kind of crumbly. Such a consistency made it extremely easy to create the look of a muddy embankment. I gotta say that carving this is way easier than foam, and the texture is pretty believable. However, as with other projects, the finer details pull a lot of weight. I embedded a few small roots and rocks in the overhang, which helped significantly. All of this carving resulted in a lot of scraps, which unlike foam can be reused while they're still wet. I just mixed in some more water, and it was enough to fill the rest of the scape. What little remained I pressed into the roots for added effect. With only one bag, the appearance was strong. However, I felt the right side was a little flat, so I mixed up a second bag to add further definition. I figured driftwood could help with that as well. Once cured, the structure itself was dynamic, but now the color appeared flat. Luckily, concrete glazes can address that, but not in the same way as paint. They'll stain and recolor the surface without removing any detail. Umber accents over the entirety of the sculpture helped it appear warmer. A feature you'll notice with watering holes is that the mud is always darker around the water. I mixed up black and umber and diluted it with water to replicate this. I later scuffed the surface with a wire brush to add highlights. Some cleanup work was required as well, but that's to be expected. I was glad to see the scape come together, but the enclosure wasn't complete. Reaching through the top of Sam's current tank isn't just an issue because of his size. It's also kinda sketchy because of poor access. All I'll say is that I've been bitten by him twice because of it, and it's no fun. While taking a step back to review everything, I couldn't help but feel like something was missing. The branch on the right looked out of place, but I couldn't undo it. I combined it with other pieces to mimic the appearance of a stump in eroding soil. I took as many liberties as possible with the scape, and it turned out well despite not being as detailed as I'd prefer. With Sam, there's a fine line between form and function. Inevitably, the details have to be an afterthought because he has to be able to traverse through the space without destroying it. Anyway, I like to clean these backgrounds before adding the finishing touches so nothing from construction remains. It seems that the plant these frogs encounter most in the wild is grass, so that's what I wanted for this build. I've tried going bioactive with him before, but it's pointless. Because of his size and habits, it inevitably gets gross and needs to be replaced. Instead, I just use plain old coconut fiber. I want the grass in this area, but they do better with a different substrate. To get around this, I mixed up a different blend and placed them in permeable plant bags. This gave me the best of both worlds. The substrate can be easily replaced with minimal disruption to the plants. I may add more later, but for now, less is more. He needs adequate room to dig and crawl around.
Hey Ominium.
Unfortunately, the cocoa fiber and sand kind of exposed the fact that I didn't make the concrete brown enough. I suppose some mistakes should have been expected though, because this was my first time trying this in a full-blown build. Here's a quick breakdown of how much it cost me to make this background, excluding tolls, tax, and shipping.
It's
Keep
looking
in mind
cool
that I made
already.
my background largely out of scrap materials. I put the rough cost of foam in here just to get a better calculation. I'll admit that it may not be the cheapest method around, but all things considered with these results, I'd say it's well worth it. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I felt this would appear best with tannins in the water.
OMG.
I don't know what's going on, but all of a sudden, the big man's not looking so big anymore. With the right care, African bullfrogs can live for well over 30 years, so it's very possible I'll still have him by the time my kids go to college, and I don't even have kids yet. In fact, most of the animals you see me work with are pretty long-lived, which is part of the reason why I constantly reiterate their setups, even if it's in response to something unplanned like a leak or escape. Sometimes there's failure, and I suppose that's life in general. We fail, and our growth is determined by how we react and adapt to such scenarios. I assumed the drip would be a nice tranquil feature he'd enjoy, but my judgment was off, and it had a negative effect. I did bandage the situation for a while, but band-aids don't last forever, and he was happy to remind me of that. I'm glad he did. Samson truly looks at home.
Amazing. Thanks for sending the vid. Was fun. When I see glass panels like this, I remember that with my dad we used to go to a place where they sell glass panels. Next vid. Creating paradise for the world's most hated toad, cane toad vivarium. Do you hate this creature? Do you hate this creature? I think he looks pretty polite. But kinda angry. His face judges me. His face judges me. Lolololo. And judges you too. Lololololololo. Let's see this lil fella.
Pistachio. She's a cane toad, the most hated amphibian in the world.
You can see hundreds, if not thousands of
invasive toxic cane toads are
prompting some councils
to wage a war on public enemy #1.
These enormous toads are infamous for their negative impact on the environment, which has led to widespread eradication efforts. Ironically, they can make excellent pets, and Pistachio, who was once an alien in Florida that would have caused havoc or been disposed of, was given a second chance at life. Since she cannot return to the wild, I've done my very best to recreate her natural jungle habitat within a spacious 6-foot vivarium. Sensational headlines paint these toads as demons, but despite the issues they cause, they don't mean any harm and didn't ask for this. They're simply living, which isn't an issue in South and Central America where they originate, because predators adapted to their poison keep their populations in check. The issue is in other parts of the world, where they were introduced 100 years ago as pest control for sugar farms. Since then, they've decimated native fauna and poisoned animals that tried to eat them. A small measure that helps mitigate these happenings is for them to be kept responsibly as pets, especially in places they can't naturalize. Pistachio has been a Pennsylvania girl under my care for over 2 years now. Since she's from the wild, getting her used to my presence hasn't been as easy as most of my other animals who are captive bred. There's been some progress, but I know moving her into a proper setup will change everything. I've worked with many animals over the years, and it's always apparent when they're comfortable with me. This is essential because I want them to understand I don't mean any harm and I'm simply part of their environment. All that's to say, it tends to happen faster in large naturalistic enclosures like the one I'm about to build, which allow for the broadest range of behaviors and not necessarily more human exposure. Pistachio is a wild animal in the subtropics of Florida, so she's never actually seen her natural environment. That's what I wanted to replicate, but finding any documentation of these toads where they actually belong is really challenging. However, I know they live in the Amazon basin and other areas in Central America, so that's the environment I decided to mimic. These toads like to soak in water, which is no surprise considering where they originate. Including a proper water feature made sense because constantly cleaning out a water bowl like I have been doing for years is annoying and wouldn't look as good.
Cane toads are the largest toads in the world, with females attaining a length of up to 12 inches. Pistachio here has a lot of growing left to do, but even at this adolescent size, she's much larger than most of the toads native to North America, which partly explains why they're so detrimental.
I'm usually not a fan of just putting a divider in the tank. They tend to look sloppy from the front, but it was the best solution here. Anyway, she'll spend much of her time being active on the land, so I kept it large. To be honest, I've never had a DIY aquarium leak, and I've built many of them, so I rarely do a water test. However, the same hasn't been true for partitions. The issue has been that glass squeezes out most of the silicone, causing the seam to fail. Since adding bumpers, which I did here, I haven't had any problems, but doing a test for good measure never hurts. Using scrap materials is kind of the theme here. The partition was salvaged from an old tank, and I've been accumulating foam scraps that I've slowly made use of. Building a foundation from these was challenging because I didn't want a massive foam and the pieces weren't ideal. Instead, I created boxes and angular shapes to build a rough configuration on the glass. Perfection wasn't the goal, but what I wished to make was the foundation for a rocky face, complete with a running waterfall. I used this image as a reference. Having hollow rocks ensured the structure would remain lightweight and made running the filter's return simple. All the meticulous work paid off, but this was only a dry fit. I crossed my fingers and hoped to get it looking this good again the second time while adhering them with silicone. The rocks would be the primary feature, but I wanted them to appear as though they're surrounded by dirt and roots to simulate the jungle aesthetic. Believe it or not, this sloppy looking foam thing is the perfect foundation for precisely that.
Wow.
I recently began using vertical concrete to craft backgrounds. I hadn't done anything this complicated because I was still getting used to the materials. I knew more work would be involved and there was a higher risk of failure, but I was ready for this challenge. That said, even this background was more straightforward than others I have planned. Anyway, I had to work in steps to make this happen, beginning with the rocks. The default color was perfect for this application, so I just mixed it up and got to work. I was careful to arrange the foam as I did based on the reference image, but I had to be even more mindful of how I built up concrete. I'd be carving it in no time, so I had to imagine how it would appear with missing material, water flowing over it, and covered with plants. That's the artistry behind nature design and a skill I've developed over time. Visualizing the final result before starting helps set me in the right direction. Admittedly, they never turn out as expected because I adjust the designs as they unfold, but having a vision makes all the difference. Using inspiration helps too, in this case an image. However, I find that trying to replicate things exactly takes out the fun. The freeform approach allows me to get in a flow state, which keeps me motivated throughout the tedious tasks. What I love about this technique though is the carving process. This material lends itself well to the types of texture you imagine in nature, like wood, stone, and mud. With a simple trowel, the outer layers slump off and just kind of reveal the desired textures. I'm not sure how else to explain it. I've made foam rocks and used natural stones to create waterfalls, but simply carving it out of this was just so satisfying in comparison. I think that's because I had complete control over the material. Even so, this process is very time consuming and a labor of love, because it took well over 8 hours to carve. I know I'll be able to create better sculptures as I develop this skill, but even now I love the results. The textures were great, but staining the surface with glazes to add color would make all the difference. With various hues at my disposal, I was able to accentuate the details and make the surface appear weathered. Rocks are never a solid color. They're stained, contain mineral deposits, and have other features which cause variations. Adjusting the colors and adding details like faux iron deposits are what I feel truly make this appear genuine. Applying these wets the surface, so the actual coloration wasn't showing, but I knew what I applied and where. I just had to trust the process. As a final measure, I scuffed the surface to create highlights. When I think of the jungle, I always imagine some type of wood, whether trees, fallen branches, or roots. The space on the right was perfect for a root ball structure or something of that nature. So when I mixed up the second batch of concrete, I added a brown pigment. Forming this around everything I've added thus far brought it together in a big way. You know I'm a man about the details and had to add little roots throughout. Seeing how these looked alongside the other elements as the dirt texture emerged was incredible. However, something was off when it dried because it was almost purple. That was the same issue I had in my African bullfrog's recent paludarium build, which uses many of the same techniques. I'll link that up in the description if you want to see what I did there. Anyway, I thought the rust coloration, which used a glaze I didn't have before, could help with this. Definitely good input from Steven and Gar, who recommended adding red last time the dirt was off, because that's what I did here, and it worked well. I go into all of these builds a little differently based on the animals. This would be a jungle vivarium, so false bottom was required. However, Pistachio digs, so it had to be one she couldn't disturb, and it had to be drainable. Sometimes I drill through the tank, but I thought a standpipe was a better option. Details like this can be easily overlooked, but make these setups run better and easier in the long run. Ideally, I want to intervene and tamper with this as little as possible. I do nearly everything alone here and have to improvise when making these big tanks. Covering the sides of the tank was a bit of an afterthought, but it needed done and there was no time to waste. Regardless of what I do, I always like to clean these backgrounds before adding life. That gave me a quick preview of the waterfalls, which I enjoyed, but I had to stay focused. I still had to make the false bottom tamper proof, and the ideal material for that was Matalamat. I'm sad to see them go, because these are all that remain from the original DIY pond I built 5 years ago. Anyway, the panels fit tightly in this space, so it all just kinda worked as is. I just had to fill a small void in the front and foam around the standpipe. A DIY technique that's been invaluable for me over the years is making screens. They're literally just window screens made to the specifications of the tank's frame. I will say though that in the past I've used fiberglass mesh. It's easier to stretch, but it doesn't hold up as well as aluminum, so I've switched to that. Either way, the process is pretty straightforward. However, I had to trim off some of the driftwood before they could be installed. Proper substrate is always an essential component that I adjust from build to build based on the goal. This mix had to retain humidity, allow for burrowing, and provide stability for the plants. Just mixing it up doesn't make it bioactive though. It's the addition of tiny organisms and development of things like bacteria and fungi that bring the environment to life. It takes time for all of that to happen, but I keep bins of seasoned substrate on deck, which are cycled with bacteria and contain critters like earthworms, springtails, and isopods. The plants would serve a crucial role in this process as well, but I couldn't add them until I installed the glass tracks. I've typically used silicone for this, but my friend Troy Goldberg, who specializes in dart frog vivariums, recommended mounting tape instead. That's what I did here, and I gotta say it was much easier and apparently holds up better. The challenge with these larger animals is that they can ruin plants. Luckily, Pistachio is still pretty small, so I can take more liberties now and adjust things as she grows. However, I think that setting up the foundation for a dense canopy is a viable long-term plan. Theoretically, she won't go in this area, and the plants will be well established when she's large enough to disturb them if she tries. Plus, I know that all the overhead coverage will help her feel secure. I did add a few plants to the substrate as well, but I don't intend to keep them there. I ordered a few ferns that she'd naturally encounter that were meant for those locations. Of course, they didn't arrive on time, and I had to finish this project, so I'll just fix it later. On a side note, if you made it this far in the video, are new to the channel, and enjoy this sort of thing, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss out on future uploads. For those who have watched the channel for years and continue to support what I do, you know I appreciate every last one of you. As I said before, I've had Pistachio for over 2 years. I waited so long to do this because I didn't want to invest in making something elaborate until she grew. She also spent longer in quarantine in a different room for biosecurity purposes since she was wild caught. That said, even though I haven't shown her before, this isn't the first time I've ever mentioned her.
I also got all of my isopods in the other room just through there, and we got Pistachio, but I haven't shown her yet, so that's for another time.
Anyway, I was curious about the waterfalls. How would they flow? Once the canister filter expelled the air, it flowed like a champ. Maybe even a little too strong, but that's better than the other way around. Nothing a little moss couldn't fix. I can't wait to see how it looks as it establishes on the rocky structure. I feel that it's pretty much an obligation for setups intended to mimic the jungle to include a covering of leaf litter and botanicals. They just look correct while also serving an essential function. This covering is an ideal refuge for the organisms that ensure these setups thrive. Here they can process waste into nutrients for the plants without becoming food themselves. Seeing it all come together was a joy. Although it's not seasoned yet, is missing a few key components and requires a few adjustments, I think it does look like a proper jungle landscape. On the right is a densely planted forest with plenty of hiding places. I'll have to thin this out and change a few things as she grows. Meanwhile, the left side opens up into a rocky jungle waterfall and pooling area. With beneficial bacteria growing on the sand and within the canister filter, this can all be easily maintained to ensure she always has access to clean water. That's all good and well in theory, but in practice, what would Pistachio actually think of her new home? Finally seeing Pistachio in a proper vivarium is fantastic. Even so, she's still quite unsure of my presence, and I'm sure that will continue for the foreseeable future. I want her to feel as comfortable as possible, and I believe that living and growing in this jungle vivarium in an active area of the room should allow her to ease up sooner than later. Although this doesn't solve the cane toad issue at large, at least this one is free to live its life safely without being a potential menace. I'm so excited to see her thrive and grow in here and to share that with you. If you enjoyed the project and want to see similar builds, I've linked up a few I think you'll enjoy. Until next time, Serpa Squad, take care and peace.
That was frogtastic. Thanks for sending this D-vids, they are fun and chill to watch. Vivariums always seemed so cool to me. The whole process. Tanks too. In general. My brodas, I hope y'all enjoyed da vids. Thanks for being here and chill with me. Yeah, seems like lots of skills to do one. Like lots. But with practice. It's time for this vampire to resto. Thanks for the support today. IRL is being complex, but here I feel safe. Is not scary. Thanks for being here. Let's have more fun times tomorrow. Please take care. Drink lots of water. I love y'all too, thanks for caring about me. It means a lot. Please donate plasma if you can. And have a nice rest of the day or night. I will see y'all tomorrow.
맞다네 잣도상. 시요르. and, bye bye, bye bye, bye bye.